Coding is pretty hard. Plus, I'm majoring in business, so I never learned how to code properly. So in this video, I'm going to teach you basically everything I've learned from coding, so you don't have to spend so much time researching and not knowing what to do. Alright, then let's go straight to the point. Assuming you never learned how to code before, coding basically divides into two screens. The screen that you code and the screen that you see. Now, the screen that you code is obviously the screen that you have to use the programming language. Currently, I'm using Python, and the screen that you see is what people would see. People won't see the actual code, they will actually see what you're printing in the screen. There's so many programming languages that you can learn, but to start with, I really recommend using Python or HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And this is because these languages are easy to learn, and once you learn these languages, it is not as hard to learn new languages. And instead of watching hours-long video about how to code Python, I really recommend to actually code the project. Either follow the instructor and actually code it with your keyboard, or even use AI to help you create a simple function. Now, let's say you learn the basics of coding, like printing, loops, dictionary, list, functions, all sorts of stuff. Now, there are two ways you can go from here. One, learn more about the algorithm and the basics of the coding. Or two, learn real-world application and learn how to do front-end and back-end. There's no right or wrong way, so it just depends on what you're focusing on. Let's say you want to expand your knowledge or critical thinking, then you should learn more of the basics and the algorithm. A good way to do this is lead code. It's pretty hard, but when you have good stats and you're honest that you don't use AI to solve the problems all the time, no one can ever say it's not that impressive. But let's say you want to build your own startup or see how softwares work, then it's time to learn by creating real-world applications. Now, if you're planning to create a real-world application, which is full stack, that's when it gets a bit tricky. But let me simplify it for you so it's super easy to understand. The basic of the software works like this. There's a client. The client is you, or more so your phone, your laptop, computer, tablet, etc. Now, you might have heard this word called front end. And this is the part of a website or the app that you see and interact with directly. It includes everything displayed on your screen, the text, images, buttons, and animations. But don't think this part is pretty easy, because creating a professional looking app is pretty hard. When I first started coding an app, this is what it looked like. It looks pretty ugly, but now it looks like this. It's clean, it's modern, people can most likely use this. For design inspiration, you can go to Dribbble or Pinterest, or if you're just like me where you don't have design skills or you don't have time to build designs, you can hire a freelancer from Fiverr or Upwork to create the design for you. I made a whole video about how I hired a Fiverr designer for about $200 and I'm very satisfied, so you can go check that out if you want. Now, if you heard the front end, you might have heard the back end. The back end is basically the behind the scenes part that you don't see. It handles data processing, calculations, and communication with the database. And the backend code runs on the server. And the server is basically a powerful computer located somewhere in this earth that stores data and runs applications. So when you do something on the front end, like clicking a button, it might need data or an action from the backend. For example, let's say you're logging into your account. So this is how it works. When you click the button in the front end to log in, that triggers the backend using the API. An API is basically a bridge that connects the front end and the back end together, because the code of the front end and the code of the back end are separate. They don't just magically connect with each other. You have to have an API. And you might be wondering, what is an API or how do I get it? What does it look like? Is it a certificate? Is it this long form of code? Like, what is it? I had that problem too. When I first learned how to code, I was like, what does API even look like? Is it like .com or something like that? Well, API is most likely a link. And to get this link, you can either use a local API link, so it doesn't run on the internet, but only on your laptop. Or if you put your backend, which means you deployed your backend to the server will give you the link. That link is the API. So if you put that API in the front end code, now the front end and back end is connected. Anyways, when you click the button to log in, the front end uses the API to send the request to the back end. The back end receives the request and does the necessary work. It most likely will check your username and password to see if it's correct. And whether you logged in successfully or not, the back end will send the information back to the front end. And the front end has a code where, depending on if you logged in successfully or not, it either makes you logged in or it displays an alert saying you failed to log in. And that's how software basically works. For these servers and databases, there's a lot of companies that you can use, like AWS from Amazon, Azure from Microsoft, or Google Cloud from Google. Usually a lot of people use AWS, I personally use Azure, and some people use Google Cloud. And when you're using this, it most likely costs money. But don't worry, because most of these companies give you free credit. For example, I got into Microsoft for Startups Founders Hub and they granted me about $1,000 credit for Azure. But what I'm trying to say is you don't have to worry about spending too much money because when you're learning or developing, you most likely won't spend money. And even though you do spend money after these trials, it only costs 10 to 20 bucks a month to store the data or to run the server. But this depends on how many people actually use your app. Because I'm building a social media app, and if there's 1,000 people on my app posting, commenting, and doing all these stuff, there's gonna be a lot of data that we have to store, which we have to pay a lot. Anyways, the basics are now done. Now you understand how the software basically works. And now the important part is actually coding it. This is the part where you can go to YouTube or Coursera and code with the instructors. Or if you want to fasten the process like me, you can use AI. Surprisingly, AI might not be preferred by a lot of people, but I personally think it's a great tool to use, whether to learn or to develop a project. I mean, I'm not majoring in computer science, or I'm not going to spend 20 hours to listen to a course, so might as well use an AI. But do realize that there are limitations on AI. I mean, if you use AI and prompt it well, you might have the front end and back end both working correctly. But just because it works correctly does not mean it works efficiently. And this is important because when you build a complex project, you want to make it efficient. You want the operating cost to be less. But one of the mistakes that I made is that I was too dependent on AI and I just built it. And later when I recruited my co-founder, he looked at my code and said, "This is not how things work." And I made a lot of mistakes. For example, if you're coding the front end and the back end, you shouldn't construct the front end so it accesses the server every single time. Because every single time you access the server, it costs money. And later, I've learned this thing called Redux, which basically stores the data that you got from the server. So later, when you need this data, you don't have to access the server again. You can just access it from the Redux. So it doesn't cost more money and it's faster. And just the overall structure of the code, like what folder should I create, what should I name it, what file should I put in, how should I construct this code. It's just better to have a professional to teach you than just solely depending on AI. But I also love AI. Without AI, I would not be here coding my app because AI made it so easy for me to learn how to code. And as of AI, there's a lot of services out there, and I recommend either ChatGPT, the pro version, or GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot is specifically for coding. And also when you're coding, I want to emphasize the usage of libraries. A library is basically a code that is pre-written to do a specific task or has a specific function. For example, let's say you want to create a tab bar. You don't have to code the tab from scratch because there is someone in this world who made the library where you can install it to your program and then just use it. Now, if you keep coding, using libraries, and updating your codes, you might once in a while hear this thing called GitHub. And GitHub is a website where you can upload your code. And you might be wondering, why do I want to upload my code there? Well, using GitHub depends on your usage. If you're just learning how to code, or you're just coding on your laptop by yourself, you don't really need GitHub. But let's say you have a team, or let's say you want to build a portfolio, that's when you want to upload your code to GitHub. So this is how it works. When I code a project in my laptop, my co-founder does not have access to that code because it's in my laptop. So what I want to do is I upload this code to GitHub. Then GitHub will get this code, my co-founder can install my code from GitHub, and now both of us have the same code. From there, if my co-founder updates the code and upload it to GitHub, I can pull it from GitHub, and now both of us have the updated code. And that's how collaboration works. On top of that, there are other features like merge requests, pull requests, and other stuff, but you can watch other YouTube videos. They will explain it way better than me. But don't be scared if your code's gonna be leaked or anything, because you can definitely post it privately. And that's kind of it. It's been a year and a half since I started to learn and code a project, and I'm very satisfied where I'm at now. And at the end, I want to say, if you want to learn coding, whether to get a job or as a hobby, the best way to learn is to continuously learn. And to continuously learn, you need to be genuinely interested in coding. And that's how I started. Like I said, I'm majoring in business, so I don't have to really study coding, but I was just genuinely interested in creating nothing to something. And coding made that creation happen. So if you guys have any questions, comment below. I'll try to respond to every comment. And I hope I see you guys again. Bye-bye.